Hello everyone, dear friends. Today's review is dedicated to the almost flagship Xiaomi BE7000 router. It may not be a brand new release, but in terms of power, speeds, and capabilities it's still relevant. This is Xiaomi's entry ticket to Wi-Fi 7 with an emphasis on wired performance and a stable 5 GHz. For 2.5 GBE ports and USB 3.0 for a simple NAS, inside, a Qualcomm IPQ9554 platform, for at 1.5 GHz, and 1 GB of RAM. An important nuance: the China version does not use the 6 GHz band and works as 2.4 GHz plus 2 independent 5 GHz radios, essentially tri-band without 6 GHz, so real speed and interference resistance depend on the 160 MHz channel width and the cleanliness of the air. In this video we will go through setup both via the mobile app and via the web interface, run iperf 3 and a copy test to a USB drive, compare the range and signal stability with the popular BE6500, and check how the BE7000 fits into my existing mesh network based on Xiaomi routers. Specifications: chipset and stack. Qualcomm IPQ9554 with Cortex-A73 4 cores at 1.5 GHz plus radio chips QCN5024 for 2.4 GHz and QCN6224 for 5 GHz. Declared support for Wi-Fi 7, WPA3 and MLO. Memory and storage: 1 GB Nanya RAM and 128 MB gigadevice flash memory. Interfaces: for 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports auto-assignable as WAN or LAN, plus 1 USB 3.0 port, dual WAN aggregation supported, with firmware claiming up to 5 gigabits per second. Radio section: 3 bands, 2.4 GHz 4x4, plus 2 independent 5 GHz radios, each 4x4. Channel width up to 160 MHz. MLO enables simultaneous operation on the two 5 GHz bands. Antennas and amplifiers: 7 external Wi-Fi antennas, 1 internal Wi-Fi antenna and an internal NFC antenna, 8 independent Qorvo power amplifiers, 4 for 2.4 GHz and 4 for 5 GHz. Software and compatibility: management via the Chinese web interface, which can be translated in the browser, and via the Xiaomi Home app. Quick smartphone connection using NFC, mesh support with Xiaomi routers. Power and chassis: power adapter rated at 12 volts and 3 amperes, large enclosure measuring 408 by 133 by 177 millimeters. Passive cooling. China version: important. The 6 GHz band is absent due to regulatory restrictions in China. Instead, 2 separate 5 GHz radios are used, which still lets you take advantage of Wi-Fi 7 features such as MLO and 160 MHz channels. First of all, I want to thank my friend Sergey. On my advice from the Telegram channel, China and the Smart Home, he bought this router for a large house as the main node of a mesh network and, at my request, lent it for testing. The BE7000 comes in a very large box. The post slightly dented the edge, but everything inside is intact. I checked. On the front, a large photo of the router, above, the model, at the bottom, an emphasis on Wi-Fi 7, on the back the main advantages are listed schematically. This is a version for the Chinese market, and there's a plus in that it is usually cheaper than its counterparts with the same specs, and instead of 6 GHz it uses a pair of independent 5 GHz bands. These can be separated by channels, and MLO with 160 plus 80 MHz can be engaged on compatible clients. In addition, there is NFC here for quick smartphone connection. We open the lid. The inside is covered with soft foam. The router itself lies in a plastic cradle and is covered with a transport film, and each of the 7 antennas has an individual protective sleeve. This is not just stylish, but also a visually striking router that you won't want to hide behind a cabinet. It will take its place in the interior. The Xiaomi package is familiar: a power supply with a Chinese plug, the seller included an adapter to European. Fits snugly, a thin barrel connector, cable length about 130 centimeters. The power supply is powerful, 12 volts, up to 3 amps, keep this in mind if you power it through a UPS. There is also a 1-meter Ethernet cable in the box for connecting the WAN or a client device. I usually keep such ones in reserve. Let's move on to our hero, the the Xiaomi BE7000. Let's move directly to the appearance of our big router. The Xiaomi BE7000 features a unique design with 7 external antennas that can be adjusted for optimal signal coverage. The AIoT antenna in the center glows white during operation. The router is made of plastic and has a narrow but long construction, which makes it taller than most routers. The body is elongated and triangular. On the top edge there is a stylish golden stripe. The router's name in the same color is placed in the lower right corner, and above it the NFC chip module is marked. The case is equipped with ventilation openings to maintain a low temperature, since wall mounting is not provided. On the front panel in the center there are 2 status indicators, white and red. When the Internet indicator above it lights white, it means the network connection is working normally. On the back of the router there are 4 2.5G network ports, each of which supports WAN/LAN auto-assignment and high-speed aggregation of 2 WAN/LAN. And they have their own plus. The ports are equipped with status LEDs, a small green light. This is a very convenient thing for the initial diagnostics of the local network. To the right of the 2.5 Gbps network port there is a USB 3.0 interface for expanding storage with USB mobile hard drives and implementing some NAS functions. Nearby is the Reset/Mesh button, which allows easy connection to Xiaomi routers to create mesh networks with one press. Setting up this router, even if it is intended for the Chinese market and all the settings are in Chinese, is not difficult. Let's walk through it. Connect the router to power. The system indicator LED lights orange. When it glows white, the router has booted and is ready to use. Now just connect the cable from your internet provider. You can plug it into any port. The router will automatically determine which port will be LAN and which will be WAN. I still prefer to connect the WAN to port number 1. After that you have 2 options. Configure it with a smartphone or with a laptop. Once the router sees the internet indicator LEDs will glow a soft white. Let's set it up using the Mi Home app. Install it, register, and open it. Let's start with the smartphone. Connect to the open Wi-Fi network named RC06MINE plus 4 characters. Then in the pop-up window open the notification from the router. Agree to all the items and tap the blue button. If you need separate networks for 5 GHz and 2.4 GHz, turn off the combining switch at the top. You will immediately see separate settings for 2.4 and 5 GHz. I will keep the combined 2.4 plus 5 GHz network. Next, change the Wi-Fi name and enter the password, tap the blue button again, and remember the login details. If everything went well, the internet indicator will turn white, which means internet access is available. Orange means attention is required. In most cases the connection to the provider is configured automatically. All that remains is to find the renamed network in the list and enter the set password, and the internet is ready. You can manage the router through the Mi Home app. On my first launch the device was found automatically. If not, tap the plus at the top. Choose Add Device. Then the Router tab, and find Xiaomi BE7000 in the list. After entering the administrator password, which by default matches the Wi-Fi password, you can choose a virtual room and rename the router if you wish. The app shows the internet connection status and the current data transfer speed. The router supports the Wi-Fi 7 standard and mesh networks. There is a separate button for adding new devices to the mesh, which simplifies expanding coverage without complex settings. Connected devices list. In this section you can see detailed statistics, the amount of traffic used, connection time, current download and upload speeds, and signal level. Here you can also set a speed limit for each device and change its type and brand for easier identification in the list. Basic Wi-Fi settings. On the main screen of the app you see the name and password of your Wi-Fi network, and there is an option to generate a QR code for quick connection. In the settings you can manage the 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz bands and change the network name and password if needed. By default, combining the 2.4 and 5 GHz networks is enabled, which is convenient so you do not have to switch manually to the faster network. But if some smart home devices refuse to connect to such a combined network, clear the checkbox and you will get two networks. One keeps the name you set, the second has the prefix 5. After setting up the device, switch everything back, enable combining, and the device will continue to work normally. This has long been a proven approach. Advanced Wi-Fi parameters. You can enable or disable MU-MIMO, a compatibility mode with Wi-Fi 5, and you can also disable fast device connection. The settings for 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz are similar. You choose the encryption method. The transmit power is maximum by default. The channel is selected automatically. In the 5 GHz parameters you can additionally enable support for a channel width of 160 MHz. Network connection settings. You can choose the type of connection to the provider or the router's operating mode, standard mode, access point mode, or repeater mode. If necessary, you can switch the WAN port manually, which is convenient if you have two providers. The network information section shows the IP address obtained from the provider. The router allows you to schedule an automatic reboot or perform a one-time reboot. Given the stability of Xiaomi devices, this option is usually not needed and can be used mainly for preventive maintenance. It is also recommended to change the administrator password in the password management section, making it different from the Wi-Fi password, preferably at least 12 characters with letters, numbers, and symbols. After changing the settings, you can reboot the device immediately if needed. Firmware update. Updates are installed in one click through the built-in assistant. At the time of this review, the current version is 1.1.16, stable. You can start the update manually or enable automatic updates. By default, it runs at 0400. During the process, do not turn off the power or the internet. After installation, the router will automatically reboot and restore the connection. LED control. You can turn off all lighting on the front panel and also disable the LED indicators for the Ethernet ports. You can set a schedule, for example, to turn them off at night and on during the day. You can quickly reset the router to factory settings, but we are not going to do that. Next is a setting specific to Xiaomi routers with a USB port, namely turning off USB 3.0 and switching the port to the slower USB 2.0. This is because a USB 3.0 port can affect Wi-Fi operation at 2.4 GHz. I will leave it enabled. IPTV is off by default, but you can enable it if necessary. The NFC module is enabled by default. It lets you connect to Wi-Fi with a single tap on the NFC zone on the router's body, provided the smartphone supports NFC and the screen is unlocked. The phone receives the network name and password and offers to connect without manual entry. If needed, NFC can be disabled in the router settings. A security recommendation. For guests, it is better to use a guest network so you do not share the main password. When you change the password, previously issued tap-to-connect pairs will stop working. Port aggregation combines two LAN ports to increase the connection speed to 5 gigabits per second. It is off by default. Network optimization. You can enable quality of service, which lets you set priorities for different types of traffic and limit speed. It is off by default. Wi-Fi optimization helps improve link quality, for example by changing the channel to reduce interference or by increasing signal strength. Router apps. The Wi-Fi timer lets you automatically turn the wireless network on and off. You can also enable a guest Wi-Fi network so you do not give access to your entire network. It is off by default. I recommend enabling it. You can enable it permanently or, for example, for an hour or a day. This is convenient if you do not always need a guest network. Protection against hacking provides an additional layer of security. I leave it as is, but here you can block devices and see how long the router has been running without a reboot. If you are asking how to activate WPS, here is the virtual button. It is useful for devices like a printer. Next is NetEase UU Game Accelerator. By default, this app is not installed, and you should not install it unless you play on Asian servers. The service optimizes the network route to game servers. Essentially, it is a gaming VPN plus traffic prioritization. The idea is to reduce ping and jitter and to lessen lag in online play. Personal computers and the switch. PlayStation, and Xbox consoles are supported. A small UU plugin is installed on the router. For selected games and devices, a tunnel is created to NetEase UU nodes, DNS is adjusted, and prioritization rules are enabled, that is, quality of service. Sometimes this helps you get a more friendly NAT. The next app is essentially a speed test for checking network speed. It is not worth installing. It measures speed oddly, apparently against Chinese servers. The Game Helper Accelerator is, in essence, another built-in accelerator plugin for online games, similar to UU but from another provider. It is not installed and is not needed. The next plugin handles associations of domain names to IP addresses. This is also not needed and is not installed. A section that will not appear on routers without USB. Samba. Here you are asked to agree to provide account information and the plugin in the router will be enabled. This is a rather useful plugin. This router has file access over SMB. Turn on the toggle and all devices on the local network can see the router's storage and USB drives. On a PC, just open File Explorer and enter the router's IP address. On a TV or media box, choose Samba or SMB and enter the IP. If the client asks for a login, first try guest with no password. If needed, use the administrator credentials. By default there is no password. I will show this below. For safety, it is better to give guests read-only access and not store sensitive files on the shared disk. In the My Storage section we see my SSD connected to the USB port. It has 3 partitions and the router sees them all. Let's move to the Soft section. Here we see various files, folders, and archives. Press and hold the file you want for a moment and a selector appears on the right so you can choose more than one file, and a menu appears at the bottom: download, delete, rename, and details. I chose a file of 518 megabytes and tapped download. Go to the transfer tab and you will see that the file is downloading to your smartphone storage. You can also see the list of completed downloads. Then the file appears in the File Downloaded tab. As for the download time for a file of 518 megabytes, roughly half a gigabyte, from an external SSD it took 1 minute 12 seconds. But the speed here will depend on the speed of your smartphone, the Wi-Fi module, and the distance from the router. Baidu NetDisk app. The BE7000 has integration with the Baidu Cloud. You sign into the service and grant the router read and write access. After that you can sync the USB drive with the cloud and fetch offline downloads directly to the router's disk. The feature is useful if you use the Baidu ecosystem. For other scenarios it is convenient to leave local access over SMB and DLNA. Family Internet Access Protection is the family protection module in the router app. It lets you bind devices to family member profiles, like son, daughter, mom, dad, and restrict internet access by schedule. I choose a profile. You can use a preset role or create your own in custom. Next I mark the device to which the restrictions will apply. In the list you can see which network the client is connected to, 2.4 GHz or 5 GHz. I set the interval when the internet will be blocked. With a slider I set the start and end time and below I mark the days of the week. For example, from 22 to 7 o'clock on weekdays. I save the rule. Now during the chosen hours the device will not go online through my Wi-Fi. You can add several intervals, separately for morning, day, and night. If necessary, the rule can be temporarily disabled or edited in the same section without affecting other devices on the network. It is important to understand that the rules apply only when the device is on your Wi-Fi network. Mobile internet is not blocked by these restrictions. The binding is by MAC address. If the phone has MAC randomization enabled, a child can bypass the rule. There is no category-based content filtering, like 18+ or social networks. In this module, it is strictly an access schedule. For content filtering you can additionally set up family DNS or use specialized services on the device itself. The Mac Backup Assistance section is built-in support for time machine backups on Mac OS over the network. I do not have a Mac and will not, so the process goes like this. The router shares the USB disk as an SMB network resource with a name like Mac Backup, and Mac OS can back up to it over the air. Turn on the feature, choose the USB drive, set a quota for how much space the backup can use, and set a login and password for access. On the Mac, System Settings, Time Machine, Add Disk, choose the router's Mac backup, enter the credentials you set, done. It is better to start the first copy over a 2.5 gigabit cable because it is faster, then incremental backups go over Wi-Fi. As you can see, you can manage and configure the router simply using the Mi Home app without even opening a browser on your PC or laptop. And as my many years of practice with Xiaomi routers shows, one rule applies here. Buy, set up, and forget. The router works completely autonomously. All you need to do is use it. Let's figure out how to set up and manage the router through the web interface. Connect to the open Wi-Fi network named RC06MINA plus 4 characters if you have not configured the router from a smartphone yet. The same window as on the phone will appear, accept all items and press the blue button. If you need separate 5 GHz and 2.4 GHz networks, turn off combining using the switch at the top. Separate settings for 2.4 and 5 GHz will appear immediately. I will keep the combined 2.4 plus 5 GHz network. Next, change the Wi-Fi name and enter the password, press the blue button again, and remember the login details. Then find the renamed network in the list and enter the set password. The internet is ready. In the connection status it shows that the protocol is Wi-Fi 6 and the band is 5 GHz, with a link speed of 1200 megabits per second, although the numbers may differ depending on your adapter. Now open a browser and enter 192.168.31.1 in the address bar. This is the standard initial IP address for Xiaomi routers. You will be asked to enter a password. At this stage it matches the Wi-Fi network password. Later I will show where to change it because leaving it like this is not safe. If the interface is in Chinese, you can enable automatic page translation in the browser for convenience. Main window. It shows the device status, the network name and its password, and the list of connected clients. In the device list you can not only view details but also deny internet access for a specific client while leaving it on the local network. By clicking the globe icon you open internet connection parameters and the settings for download and upload speed limits. Basic Wi-Fi settings. Here you can split 2.4 and 5 GHz into separate networks, choose channels, channel width, and transmit power. There is a compatibility mode with Wi-Fi 5 for older clients. Enabling target wake time helps smartphones save battery by waking up less often. It is recommended to keep MU-MIMO and Smooth Connect enabled for faster association. Internet connection. You can change the connection type from DHCP to PPPoE, set a static IP, specify your own DNS servers, and change the MAC address. This matters if your provider ties the service to a MAC address. A new router may require activation by the provider. You can also switch the operating mode to a wired or wireless repeater and configure the WAN port. IP version 6. The IP version 6 protocol is managed in the same section. I recommend disabling IP version 6 if there is no clear need. By default it is off. You can enable it if necessary. The WAN port can be left on automatic selection or fixed statically. Security. You can restrict access to the router's admin panel to cable only, and after the first login it is strongly recommended to change the administrator password so that it is different from the Wi-Fi password. In the same place you can configure allow lists of devices that are permitted to access the management panel. LAN settings. You can change the IP subnet, set the range of local addresses, and bind static IP addresses to specific devices by MAC address, also known as DHCP reservations. System settings for time zone and time. It shows the current date, time, and region. Press change time zone and choose yours. Schedules for parental controls, automatic updates, and reboots depend on this. NFC One Touch. This connects a smartphone to Wi-Fi by tapping the tag on the router's body. It works on Android with NFC enabled and the screen unlocked. If you do not use it, you can turn it off. LED lighting. You can turn the front status LEDs on or off. You can also turn the LAN port indicators on or off. This is convenient if the router is in a bedroom. Firmware update. This section shows the current version 1.1.16, stable, and the manual update button. Check, update, and the router will reboot by itself. Logs. This button exports logs for diagnostics or support. It is useful if something goes wrong. Factory reset. Before doing this, be sure to make a configuration backup. Backup and restore. Create backup saves the current Wi-Fi, WAN, and rule settings. Restore now rolls back to the saved file after a firmware update or a failure. Plugin installation. Manual installation lets you upload additional modules from a file. This tool is for advanced users. Install only trusted plugins. In advanced settings there is a quality of service menu to set traffic priorities. You can limit download and upload speeds for individual devices or for the guest network, and give higher priority to important clients such as a personal computer, a console, or a TV. This helps avoid the channel being clogged by torrents and updates. Dynamic DNS. In the DDNS section you can choose one of several dynamic DNS providers and activate the service. This is convenient if your provider gives you a dynamic IP address, because you get a permanent domain name for external access to your home. Port forwarding and DMZ. Port forwarding rules allow access to services on the internal network such as ANAS, cameras, or web interfaces. The DMZ directs all incoming traffic to a single device, so use it with care because it is essentially exposed to the outside world. Advice: whenever possible, enable targeted port forwarding instead of DMZ. Universal plug and play is optional. It is convenient but opens ports automatically. VPN. If you use a VPN, set the main connection parameters here. Remember that an active VPN can change routing and traffic prioritization. Dual WAN. For two providers there is a dual WAN function. You can aggregate or balance traffic. The total bandwidth can be higher than on a single line, and the gain is noticeable in multi-threaded tasks and with multiple clients. A single TCP session does not speed up by itself. You can also set a primary and a backup link for failover. In practice, the total speed depends on the lines and the scenario. IPTV. In older Xiaomi models this used to require tinkering with firmware. Now everything is configured in the web interface, the provider profile or a manual VLAN ID, and, if necessary, IGMP proxy and snooping plus binding a port for the set-top box. Aggregation of LAN ports. You can enable combining two LAN ports with LACP, standard 802.3 AD, theoretically up to 5 gigabits per second in total. This is useful for ANAS or file storage with several simultaneous clients. Important: the NAS or switch must also have LACP enabled, and the ports must have the same speed, otherwise aggregation will not come up. Gaming port. Gaming mode lets you choose a priority LAN port to reduce latency and jitter. Note that when quality of service is enabled or when a VPN or smart VPN is active, the priority of the gaming port is disabled. This is normal behavior. Mesh. The router supports mesh both over cable and over the air. Setting it up comes down to adding a node and confirming a couple of prompts. Device management. In this menu you can change the router's name, update firmware, get a link to the Mi Home app for mobile management, reboot the device, or log out of the current session. It is also recommended to change the administrator password immediately to a separate one that is not the same as the Wi-Fi password and, if necessary, to restrict access to the admin panel to cable only. The section many of you probably bought this router for. External storage management. What the storage and Docker section can do, how it works, and what is actually worth enabling. Storage settings for USB drives and partitions. The router detects multiple partitions on one drive, shows the file system such as NTFS, exFAT, or ext4, and offers safely remove. USB 3.0 toggle. It is on by default for maximum disk speed. Keep in mind that USB 3.0 can introduce interference in 2.4 GHz. This is a normal trait of the bus and creates noise near 2.4 GHz. If devices on 2.4 GHz start to behave erratically, temporarily switch the USB port to USB 2.0 or use a short extension cable to move the drive away from the antennas. Samba, also called SMB. Turning on the Samba features toggle shares files on the local network at the router's address. It is handy for quickly sharing photos and videos around the house. Virtual memory. Why you need it. The router creates a swap file on the USB drive, 128 megabytes or 256 megabytes. This extends the RAM for heavy tasks, especially Docker. After creating swap, do not disable it and do not unplug the drive while containers are running. Best practices: create swap before installing Docker, keep the drive connected permanently, and only disconnect it through safely remove. If you plan something heavy such as indexing inside a container or compilations, choose 256 MB right away. Docker, the real party trick of this router. What to prepare? A USB drive formatted in ext4. NTFS may mount, but for Docker the official recommendation is ext4 because it is faster for reads and writes. How to install? Open the Docker tab and choose Install Docker. The router downloads and places the Docker system on the attached drive. After installation you get the Run Docker button and install Third-Party Manager, which is a SimpleDocker web panel. The default credentials for the manager are admin, and you must change the password immediately. Where the data lives. In the manager you will see the mount location under the USB mount directory. This is the root where Docker stores images and volumes. You will need this path when deploying containers for mounts and volumes. Container compatibility. The BE7000 processor is ARM64, also known as ARCH64. Choose images built for Linux on ARM64 version 8. Heavy x86 containers will not work without emulation. Limitations. 1 GB of RAM means this is not a full server. Run lightweight services such as AdGuard Home, Qubit Torrent Knox, Transmission, Codebox, or Gitty. Set memory and CPU limits and disable everything unnecessary. If you turn off swap or unplug the drive, containers will crash. Quick step-by-step scenario. Prepare the drive by formatting it in ext4 and plug it into the router's USB port. In storage turn USB 3.0 on and Samba on. In virtual memory create a 256 MB swap file. In Docker choose Install Docker, then Run Docker, then install Third-Party Manager, the SimpleDocker panel. Immediately change the default admin password. In the manager open the storage or volumes page, note the USB mount path, and deploy your first container, for example AdGuard Home or Codebox. What to deploy for home use? AdGuard Home for ad filtering. Codebox or QL file for web access to files, similar to a mini NAS. Transmission to download torrents to the external drive. Use responsibly according to your local laws. An ADLNA server. Give each container its own volume on the USB drive and set reasonable memory and CPU limits. If you are interested in how to connect DLNA and the transmission downloader, write in the comments and I will make a separate video. As you can see, configuring through the web interface unlocks the router's bigger capabilities, namely working with Docker containers. Let's run the speed tests. Unfortunately, my equipment cannot fully reveal 2.5 gigabits per second. The network cards and the backhaul are limited to 1 gigabit per second, so the TCP ceiling on the local network is about 940 to 950 megabits per second due to protocol overhead. First, we will check the wired connection speed. Two PCs are connected to the router by cable and we measure with iperf. The first standard forward test is an upload from the client to the server. One stream 10 seconds. Result 943 megabits per second on the sender and 939 megabits per second on the receiver. The wired link saturates gigabit completely. The router does not get in the way. Reverse direction, a download to the client. One stream 10 seconds. Result 945 on the sender and 944 megabits per second on the receiver. Symmetry is excellent. Gigabit is fully saturated in the reverse direction as well. 5 parallel TCP streams forward. The total is about 0.94 to 0.95 gigabits per second. In the first interval you can see a peak of 1.05 gigabits per second, which is a normal artifact of the startup phase. Afterward it is stable around 900 to 950 megabits per second. Under multi-stream, the total bandwidth also hits the gigabit limit without drops. 5 parallel streams in the reverse direction. The total is about 0.93 to 0.95 gigabits per second. On download we also hold the gigabit ceiling. The router is stable. The graphs show no packet loss or sharp swings. Interval to interval the rate is even, which is good for stability and gaming. Now we disconnect one of the PCs from the wired network and measure over Wi-Fi. One PC is connected via Ethernet and the second PC via Wi-Fi. We run 4 iperf tests and briefly note what each command measures and the numbers we obtain. Single stream forward from the Wi-Fi client to the PC on LAN. The graph shows a ramp up to about 900 plus megabits per second in the first seconds, then the adaptation algorithm lowers the modulation. 10-second result, 695 megabits per second on the sender and 675 megabits per second on the receiver. This is the real single stream over the over-the-air speed, single stream in the reverse direction, a download to the Wi-Fi client. 10-second average, about 691 to 696 megabits per second. Symmetry is good, no dips. The radio link is stable. 5 parallel streams forward. The first seconds show a ramp up. Afterward the total bandwidth holds around 0.67 gigabits per second, totaling 670 to 675 megabits per second by the end of the test. The fluctuations between intervals are a normal Wi-Fi reaction to the air and interference. 5 parallel streams in the reverse direction. Here the router transmits and the client receives. The result is higher, a total of about 810 megabits per second, which corresponds to roughly 974 and 967 megabytes transferred over about 10 seconds. This is expected. An access point usually has a more powerful transmitter and better antennas, so Wi-Fi download is often faster than upload. Multi-streaming helps fill the channel a bit better on receive when the router is the transmitter and the client is the receiver. On transmit from the client to the router we hit the limits of the client adapter. Our wired back end is gigabit, so even with a perfect radio you will not see more than 940 to 950 megabits per second through this test bench. I will share a small secret about why it can make sense to buy the Xiaomi router intended for the Chinese market. The secret is that this version generally does not have the European limits on transmitter power or on the channel map. There are also fewer restrictions on the channels you can use, which lets you choose less crowded frequencies, sometimes ones that European routers simply do not operate on, and thus reduce interference from neighboring networks. Important note, always check your local radio frequency regulations. Some of those uncommon channels and the higher power levels may not be permitted in your country, and some client devices may not see foreign channels even if you enable them on the router. For the range test I used the Xiaomi BE7000, which showed an excellent price-to-performance ratio, speeds, and long-range capability, and which was my main router at home for almost a year. For a fair comparison I kept the conditions identical. I placed both routers side by side at the same height in the same room, even though that was not easy. I turned off the second router's mesh network to show the true results. Now I am in the adjacent room. I have walked through one more room. There are 2 walls between me and the routers. Now I have gone up to the second floor and I am in the farthest room, 2 walls and a floor slab between us. I went outside and continued measuring while moving away from the house. Between us there is 1 wall or a window. About 15 meters from the house I record signal level and real speed. About 25 meters, second measurement. About 35 meters, third measurement. About 55 meters, fourth measurement. The maximum distance is about 70 meters, the extreme point where the link still holds on 5 GHz. As you could see, at the start the signal strength was almost identical for all routers, but as the distance increased the picture began to change. In the difficult spots with 2 walls and outdoors, our review hero, the Xiaomi BE7000, generally showed a more confident link and more stable modulation. The result is that under equal conditions the BE7000 more often holds the signal farther from the access point than the BE6500, which is clearly visible around the 45 to 55 meter marks and at the maximum point of about 70 meters. Let's test the connected hard drive and services. We will start by checking the built-in Samba plugin. By default the router's IP address is 192.168.31.1. Enter it in File Explorer or in the Run dialog with 2 backslashes in front. As you can see, there are 3 folders, essentially the 3 partitions of my hard drive. I have opened the main one. Now let's check read and write speed over the Wi-Fi connection. I take a large file and copy it to my PC. The speed is about 70 megabytes per second. Now even 75, that is very good. The speed climbed to 80 megabytes per second. On average it is 80 megabytes per second. Now let's upload this same file back to the hard drive on the router. Here the speed is also around 80 megabytes per second. Let's connect over a wired connection. I take the large file and copy it to my PC. The speed increased a little, but it still stays around 80 megabytes per second. This also depends on the hardware you put on the router side, solid-state drive versus hard drive, and their read and write speeds. Now let's upload this same file to the hard drive connected to the router. As you can see, the speed went up and exceeded 100 megabytes per second. If you wish, you can make one of the partitions, or the entire hard drive, if it is not split into partitions, show up as a permanently mapped network drive. This is convenient for everyday use. I do not recommend storing an archive of family photos there, since there is no redundancy or backup. Think of it as a drive for quick access and for media like movies. Let's see how simple and fast it is to create a mesh network. I showed how to configure it and how it works in this video. First, connect the router with an Ethernet cable to any Xiaomi router that supports mesh. If the BE7000 has been used before, I recommend resetting it to factory settings. Then just plug the Ethernet cable into any port on the BE7000. After a few minutes, coordination in the mesh network will occur and the new router will be added. As you can see, my main router is the BE6500, then the BE3600 is connected by cable, and from it the BE7000. It is all very simple. Now the three routers work as a single whole and you have expanded seamless Wi-Fi coverage, switching between routers without even noticing. You can also make a mesh without cables, although speed will suffer. Reset the router to factory settings, and after it boots press the mesh button on the back for 5 seconds. After a few minutes, coordination in the mesh network will occur and the new router will be added. As you can see, the BE7000 is also in the mesh network, but the connection is wireless. Essentially, this is like a wireless repeater of the Wi-Fi signal, but the network still remains seamless. An excellent router for its price, both fast and long range. It is genuinely enough for a large apartment or even a private house. In a house I would still recommend using it as the brain of the Wi-Fi network, and placing a second, simpler router such as the BE3600 on the second floor or further across the house or property as a mesh node or extender. That way you get maximum signal and speed in every corner of the home and even in the garden. Another plus is the USB port. It's a pity Xiaomi still mostly includes it on premium models. Connect a hard drive or an SSD and you get a home media center, watch downloaded movies on the TV, flip through vacation photos, and quickly share files over the local network between PCs and smartphones. The ability to install apps via Docker is a second strong argument. Yes, you'll need to learn a bit, but there are plenty of guides. You can easily spin up AdGuard Home, Transmission, a DLNA server, and other lightweight services. In my setup this covers AD and DNS filtering, downloads to an external drive, and a media library for the whole family. On top of that you get dual WAN for aggregation or failover if you have two providers, link aggregation of LAN ports for a home NAS, flexible parental controls, and a solid mesh, both wired and wireless. Taken together, the BE7000 looks like a set-it-and-forget-it device for the next 5+ years, powerful, long-range, and full-featured, so I can safely recommend it. I hope the video was useful and that I managed to show all the capabilities of this router. Please don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel. All product links are in the description below. There's also a link to my Telegram channel with more gadgets, discounts, smart home tips, and live discussion. You'll find a link to the smart home forum as well. Topics are organized by sections, so it's easier to find what you need. Don't forget about the Facebook group, and subscribe to my channel on X. There are interesting news posts and roundups there, too. Once again, like and subscribe so you don't miss new reviews. Thank you all for watching. Peaceful skies and goodness. Bye bye.